Have you ever felt so tired of trying, tired of speaking broken English, tired of pretending your marriage is fine, tired of smiling in a country that still feels foreign, that you quietly asked yourself if it would be easier to give up, not knowing that one simple question from a stranger in a supermarket might be the unexpected turning point that restores your hope, your voice, and your courage to begin again? The day I almost gave up. There are days in America when you sit in your car outside a supermarket, engine off, hands still on the steering wheel, and you seriously wonder whether all this effort, your English, your marriage, your dream, has been quietly slipping through your fingers. That was me. I had been living and working in the United States for almost 3 years. 3 years sounds impressive when you say it out loud. Long enough to understand the tax system, health insurance paperwork, workplace expectations, and the polite rhythm of American conversations. Long enough to survive winter snowstorms and summer heat waves. But somehow, not long enough to feel fluent. Not long enough to feel fully seen. English was no longer new. It was just heavy. At work, I understood most meetings, maybe 70%. The other 30% floated above my head like invisible subtitles I couldn't read fast enough. By the time I translated everything in my mind, the conversation had already moved on. So I smiled. I nodded. I stayed quiet. Psychologists explain that when we repeatedly feel not good enough, the brain shifts into protection mode. The amygdala, the part responsible for detecting threats, doesn't care whether the threat is a wild animal or social embarrassment. It just knows discomfort. So it whispers, "Stay silent. Stay safe." And after a while, silence becomes a habit. I became very good at being silent. Silent in meetings because I was afraid of mispronouncing a word. Silent with neighbors because I didn't know how to extend small talk beyond 2 sentences. Silent at home because I was tired. Living in the U.S. is not just about language. It's about climate, culture, pace. Winter where I live feels sharp and dry, the kind of cold that stings your face before you finish locking the door. People move quickly. Schedules are tight. Everyone respects personal space. No one asks deeply personal questions unless invited. It's efficient. It's polite. It's also lonely if you come from a culture where conversations are long and loud and layered. That afternoon, my husband and I had argued. Not about love. Not about betrayal. About bills. Rent. Insurance. Groceries. The invisible math of American life. When numbers rise, tension rises with them. We still cared about each other. We were just exhausted. Motivation doesn't disappear dramatically. It leaks. You open your English notebook, and the words blur. You play a listening practice video, but your heart isn't in it. You tell yourself you'll practice speaking tomorrow. Research on motivation shows that when people feel a loss of control in one area of life, like finances or relationships, their drive in other areas drops too. I felt out of control emotionally, and my English practice became collateral damage. In the parking lot, I asked myself a dangerous question. What if I just stopped trying so hard? You can survive in America without speaking much. You can work, pay bills, take care of children, and function. But functioning is not the same as living. Deep down, I didn't move across the world just to function. I went into the supermarket only to buy milk and bread. Nothing heroic. No life-changing plan. Just a simple errand. American supermarkets are bright, organized, almost theatrical. Soft music plays overhead. People compare cereal boxes. A cashier laughs with a customer. And there it is, the cultural ritual I used to underestimate, small talk. Hi, how are you? Did you find everything okay? Crazy weather today, right? I once believed small talk was fake. Just noise. But social psychology suggests something different. Even brief, positive interactions with strangers can increase feelings of belonging and boost oxytocin, the bonding hormone. The brain registers recognition. You were acknowledged. You exist. Still, that day, I wasn't looking for connection. I was looking for speed. There's another biological truth people don't talk about. Using a second language requires more cognitive energy. Studies show your brain can consume significantly more mental resources when processing a non-native language. No wonder I felt drained after a full day of listening and decoding. I wasn't weak. I was neurologically tired. I pushed my cart slowly. I heard conversations around me, clear, fast, effortless English. I caught most of it. Enough to understand. Not enough to feel confident joining in. At the checkout line, a woman stood in front of me. Maybe in her late 50s. Silver strands in her hair. Calm eyes. She turned around and smiled. Just a normal smile. But when you're emotionally low, a normal smile can feel like a spotlight. In that moment, I didn't know that within the next few minutes, a simple question would challenge everything I had been silently concluding about my life here, about my marriage, my English, and whether I still had the strength to keep building something in this country. I thought it was just another bad day. I didn't know it would become the day that stopped me from giving up. Sometimes life doesn't change because of a grand speech. Sometimes it changes because someone looks at you and decides to ask one small question. Arriving in America, feeling invisible. Air feels different when you land in a new country for the first time. Not just colder or warmer, different in weight. The day I arrived in the United States, the sky looked impossibly wide. Highways stretched out like long gray ribbons. Everything seemed organized, structured, efficient. And for a brief moment, I felt powerful. I had done something brave. I had moved across the world. Then reality settled in. The first winter shocked me. Back home, cold was something you complained about lightly. Here, winter was an event. Snow didn't fall gently like in movies. It buried cars, blocked sidewalks, demanded preparation. I learned new vocabulary not from textbooks, but from survival, black ice, wind chill, snow advisory. Climate is not just weather, it shapes behavior. In colder states, people move quickly from house to car to office. Social life requires planning. You don't just drop by. That was my first quiet lesson about American culture. Connection is scheduled. In my home country, neighbors knock without texting first. Family gatherings stretch for hours. Conversations overlap. In the U.S., privacy is sacred. Doors stay closed. Calendars stay full. No one is rude. They're just structured. And in that structure, I began to feel invisible. At work, I did my job well. I followed instructions carefully. Americans appreciate clarity, punctuality, directness. I adapted. I learned phrases like "I'll follow up," "let's circle back," "that makes sense." My listening improved because it had to. Real life is the most intense English classroom you will ever enter. But something subtle was happening inside me. When you operate in a second language all day, you don't just translate words. You translate identity. Humor changes. Tone changes. Even your personality shifts slightly. Research in bilingual psychology suggests that people often feel like different versions of themselves depending on the language they use. I felt smaller in English. Quieter. More cautious. In my native language, I am expressive. Quick. Playful. In English, I calculated every sentence before releasing it into the air. And when you hesitate often enough, people speak over you, not intentionally, just naturally. Conversations move fast. Meetings are efficient. If you pause too long, someone else fills the silence. That's not cruelty. That's rhythm. But rhythm can erase you if you're not ready. The first year in America felt like living behind glass. I could see everything clearly, how people greeted each other, how they formed friendships, how they discussed politics carefully, how they respected rules. I studied the system, taxes filed on time, credit scores monitored, health insurance networks decoded. The policies made sense. The structure was logical. Still, logic does not cancel loneliness. I remember walking through my neighborhood during autumn. Leaves turned orange and red, the kind of beauty you see on postcards. Children laughed in front yards. Couples walked dogs. It looked like a movie scene. And I was inside it, yet somehow outside it. The human brain craves belonging as much as food. Neuroscientists compare social rejection to physical pain because similar neural pathways activate in both experiences. Feeling unseen isn't dramatic, it's biological. Your brain registers isolation as a threat. That's why small things began to hurt more than they should. A cashier who spoke too quickly. A joke I didn't fully understand. A casual invitation I couldn't attend because I felt insecure about my English. None of these moments were disasters. But repeated enough times, they built a quiet wall. Meanwhile, my husband was adjusting in his own way. We both worked hard. We both tried to be strong. But strength in a new country often looks like suppression. You don't want to complain because you chose this life. You don't want to admit weakness because you're supposed to be grateful. Gratitude and loneliness can coexist. No one tells you that. Climate differences taught me resilience. Cultural differences taught me observation. Policy differences taught me discipline. But invisibility taught me something deeper. Survival without connection is exhausting. There's a concept in psychology called microconnections. These are tiny social interactions, a nod, a smile, a short exchange, that reinforce your sense of belonging. In America, these often appear as brief, polite conversations. Not deep. Not personal. But consistent. At first, I dismissed them. I thought real connection required long talks and shared history. I didn't realize that in this culture, warmth sometimes hides inside short sentences. During my second year, I became hyper-aware of how I walked into spaces. Shoulders slightly tight. Smile prepared. Brain alert. English loaded and ready. When your nervous system stays on alert too long, fatigue follows. It's not just physical tiredness. It's emotional depletion. And emotional depletion changes how you see yourself. You start thinking, maybe I'm just not meant to fully belong here. Maybe I'll always be the foreign one. Maybe my accent will always introduce me before my ideas do. That belief is dangerous. Not because it's loud, but because it's quiet and persistent. Standing in that supermarket weeks later, before the small talk that would surprise me, I was carrying all of this. The climate shock. The cultural adjustments. The invisible wall. The pressure to perform in English every day. On the outside, I was functioning. On the inside, I was slowly fading into the background. And the strange thing about fading is this: you don't notice how dim you've become until someone unexpectedly shines a light in your direction. When English became heavy. Language is supposed to connect people. For me, it started to feel like a weight I carried on my back from morning to night. At first, learning English felt exciting. New words were like small trophies. I practiced pronunciation in the mirror. I repeated phrases from YouTube videos. I wrote down expressions I heard at work. Touch base, no worries, I appreciate it. Progress felt measurable. Clear. But somewhere between survival and expectation, English stopped being a tool and started becoming a test. At work in the United States, clarity matters. Meetings move fast. Ideas are shared directly. There is confidence in the way people speak, even when they are unsure, they sound sure. That confidence used to intimidate me. When it was my turn to speak, my heart rate increased slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Research shows that speaking a second language in public can activate mild stress responses similar to performance anxiety. Your body prepares for judgment, even if no one is judging you. I would rehearse simple sentences in my head before saying them out loud. I think we should consider another option. Can you clarify that timeline? That makes sense. These are basic sentences. Nothing poetic. Nothing complex. And yet, they required preparation. The exhausting part wasn't grammar. It was identity. In my native language, I am quick-witted. I interrupt playfully. I tell stories with rhythm. In English, I paused. I calculated. I edited myself in real time. My personality felt compressed. There is a theory in bilingual psychology suggesting that language influences self-perception. When vocabulary is limited, self-expression narrows. When self-expression narrows, confidence shrinks. It becomes a cycle. And cycles are heavy. Outside of work, the wait continued. Parent-teacher meetings. Doctor appointments. Phone calls with customer service. In America, so much happens over the phone. No facial cues. No body language. Just voice and speed. Phone calls were the worst. When someone spoke too quickly, I felt my brain scrambling. By the time I processed the first sentence, the second one had already passed. I would say, "Sorry, could you repeat that more often than I wanted to?" Each repetition felt like proof of inadequacy. Objectively, it wasn't. Asking for clarification is normal. But emotionally, it felt like falling behind. At home, the weight spilled into my marriage. My husband and I both carried stress from work, finances, and adaptation. Sometimes our arguments weren't about the actual problem. They were about tone. About misunderstanding. About fatigue. Imagine two people speaking a second language all day, then coming home emotionally drained. Small misunderstandings grow larger when patience is low. A simple sentence like, "You didn't tell me," can sound like blame instead of confusion. Language doesn't just communicate content. It carries emotion. And when emotion is tired, language becomes sharp. There were evenings when I avoided practicing English completely. I told myself I deserved rest. And rest is important. But deep down, I also felt avoidance growing. Psychologists call this learned helplessness. When repeated small failures accumulate, the brain begins to predict future failure. So it reduces effort to protect you from disappointment. It sounds dramatic. But it doesn't look dramatic in real life. It looks like skipping practice. It looks like staying quiet in meetings. It looks like choosing silence over risk. The irony is this: the more I avoided speaking, the heavier English felt. The less I practiced, the more intimidating conversations became. Avoidance feeds fear. Exposure reduces it. That's one of the most well-documented principles in behavioral psychology. But knowing the principle and applying it are different things. I began to measure my worth in pronunciation, in vocabulary, in fluency. When I spoke smoothly, I felt valuable. When I stumbled, I felt small. That's when English stopped being a language and started becoming a mirror. And mirrors can be cruel when you're already doubting yourself. Yet here's the quiet truth I didn't understand at the time: real English is not perfect English. Real English is messy, accented, interrupted, laughed through, corrected gently. In America, people care more about clarity than perfection. Most of the pressure I felt wasn't external. It was internal. The brain has a negativity bias. It remembers embarrassing moments more vividly than successful ones. I could recall every mispronounced word. I rarely remembered the dozens of conversations that went completely fine. By the time that supermarket afternoon arrived, English felt like something I had to survive each day instead of something I could use to connect. And that shift, from connection to survival, is where motivation quietly begins to collapse. I didn't realize that the very place I least expected growth, a checkout line under fluorescent lights, was about to show me a different version of English. Not the heavy one. The human one. Marriage in a foreign land. Marriage doesn't break loudly in a new country. It stretches quietly. When my husband and I first moved to the United States, we felt like a team of explorers. Everything was new jobs, new systems, new rules about credit scores and insurance plans. We filled out forms together. We compared health plans like we were studying for an exam. We celebrated small victories, like understanding a complicated utility bill without calling customer service. At the beginning, the challenge bonded us. But adaptation has phases. The first phase is adrenaline. The second is exhaustion. By the second year, our conversations shifted. Instead of dreaming about travel or future plans, we discussed budgets, rent increases, car maintenance, childcare costs. In America, stability requires structure. Structure requires money. And money requires long hours. Long hours reduce patience. Cultural differences added subtle pressure. In the U.S., independence is highly valued. Personal space is respected. Emotional expression is often measured. We both came from a background where family involvement was constant and loud. Here, support systems are smaller. You solve problems privately. That privacy can feel empowering. It can also feel isolating. There were evenings when we sat at the same table, both scrolling on our phones, both tired, both carrying unspoken stress. Nothing dramatic. No shouting. Just distance. Psychologists describe something called emotional bandwidth. When work, language processing, financial responsibility, and cultural adaptation consume your bandwidth, there's less left for tenderness. Love doesn't disappear. It just competes with survival. In our case, English quietly influenced our misunderstandings. After spending all day thinking in a second language, subtle emotional cues get lost. Tone becomes sharper than intended. A short reply sounds dismissive. A delayed response feels cold. When cognitive fatigue increases, empathy temporarily decreases. It's not intentional. It's neurological. One night, a simple disagreement about expenses escalated. I felt unheard. He felt criticized. The argument wasn't really about money. It was about pressure. About fear of failing in a country that doesn't slow down for you. We both chose this life. That made complaining feel like weakness. Gratitude can silence pain. You tell yourself, we're lucky to be here. Others would trade places. And that's true. But emotional strain doesn't disappear just because your situation looks successful from the outside. There's a concept in relationship psychology called stress spillover. External stress, like financial uncertainty or workplace pressure, spills into the relationship. Couples begin reacting to each other as if they are the source of stress, even when they are actually allies. That was happening to us. Our love language used to be long conversations. Now it was logistical updates. Did you pay the bill? Did you call the school? What time is your shift tomorrow? Romance became efficient. Still, beneath the fatigue, something steady remained. We didn't want to give up. We just didn't know how to reset. Living in America also means navigating policies that shape family life. Parental leave is limited in many workplaces. Childcare is expensive. Healthcare decisions require research. Every choice feels high stakes. The responsibility is constant. Responsibility changes how you speak to each other. Instead of how are you feeling, it becomes what's the plan. Instead of I miss you, it becomes we need to review our schedule. When emotional expression decreases, loneliness can grow, even inside a marriage. One quiet evening, after another small argument, I noticed something uncomfortable. I wasn't just tired of English. I was tired of trying to be strong all the time. Tired of proving we could handle this new life. Strength is admirable. But constant strength becomes armor. And armor blocks intimacy. Research shows that couples who regularly express vulnerability, even briefly, maintain stronger emotional bonds. Vulnerability doesn't require dramatic confessions. It requires honesty in simple sentences. I'm overwhelmed. I'm scared. I need help. I wasn't saying those sentences. I was saying practical ones instead. By the time that supermarket afternoon arrived, I wasn't only carrying personal doubt. I was carrying relational fatigue. The kind that doesn't scream but lingers. Standing in line with groceries, I wasn't thinking about destiny or transformation. I was thinking about dinner. About unfinished conversations. About whether I had the energy to keep building a life that still felt slightly foreign. Marriage in a foreign land is not a fairy tale or a tragedy. It's a negotiation between love and pressure. And sometimes, when pressure builds quietly for too long, it takes something completely unexpected, a voice outside the marriage, to remind you that connection is still possible. Not dramatic connection. Just human connection. And that reminder was closer than I realized. The supermarket moment. Fluorescent lights are not romantic. Grocery carts are not symbolic. And yet, that afternoon, under bright white lights between aisle 7 and the checkout counter, something shifted in me. I was standing in line, holding milk, bread, and a box of cereal my child had insisted on. My mind wasn't present. It was replaying the argument from the night before. It was calculating the next bill due. It was questioning my energy, my English, my resilience. The woman in front of me turned around. She had kind eyes. The kind that look at you directly, not through you. She smiled, not exaggerated, not forced. Just human. Then she said, casually, long line today, huh? That was it. For simple words. I could have nodded and ended it there. That would have been safe. But something inside me decided to answer fully. Yeah, I said slowly, it's busier than usual. My accent was clear. My sentence was simple. My heart was racing slightly, the way it always did before speaking to strangers. She laughed softly. Guess everyone waited until the last minute. It wasn't a deep conversation. It wasn't life advice. It wasn't therapy. But then she asked another question. How's your day going? That question is everywhere in America. Cashiers say it. Coworkers say it. Neighbors say it. Most of the time, the expected answer is short, good. Not bad. Can't complain. My brain prepared the automatic response. Good. But for a split second, I hesitated. Psychologists describe something called a microchoice. In social interactions, we constantly choose between authenticity and protection. Protection is safer. Authenticity is riskier, but more connecting. That afternoon, maybe because I was already emotionally exposed, I chose slightly more honesty. It's been a long day, I said. Not dramatic. Not detailed. Just honest. She didn't look uncomfortable. She didn't look impatient. She nodded slowly. I get that, she replied. Sometimes a grocery run is the quiet break we didn't know we needed. Her sentence was simple. Clear. Warm. Something inside me relaxed. There's research showing that brief empathetic responses, even from strangers, can significantly reduce perceived stress. The human nervous system responds to tone and facial expression quickly. When someone acknowledges your emotional state, even lightly, your body shifts out of defense mode. I felt that shift. We talked for maybe 2 more minutes. About the weather. About how fast time moves. About how busy life feels lately. I didn't share my immigration story. I didn't explain my marriage stress. I didn't confess my insecurity about English. But I spoke. And she listened. No correction. No impatience. No judgment about my accent. Just conversation. The cashier called her forward. She paid. Before leaving, she turned back once more and said, "Hope tomorrow feels lighter." That sentence stayed with me. Hope tomorrow feels lighter. She didn't know me. She didn't know how close I had been to emotional shutdown. She didn't know I had been quietly questioning whether I could keep pushing through language barriers and relational fatigue. Yet in less than 5 minutes, something fundamental changed. English didn't feel like a test in that moment. It felt like a bridge. Small talk, something I once dismissed as superficial, suddenly revealed its deeper function. In American culture, small talk isn't always about content. It's about recognition. It says, "I see you. You are part of this shared space." Social scientists have found that people consistently underestimate how meaningful brief conversations with strangers can be. We assume they will be awkward or shallow. In reality, they often boost mood more than we expect. That supermarket line became proof. As I moved forward to pay for my groceries, I noticed something subtle. My posture changed. My breathing slowed. My thoughts softened. Nothing in my external life had changed. Bills still existed. Marriage still required effort. English still demanded courage. But I no longer felt invisible. And invisibility had been the heaviest part. Walking out of the store with plastic bags in my hands, I realized something almost ironic. I had spent years studying English grammar, pronunciation, vocabulary lists. Yet the most powerful English moment of my week had been this. "Long line today, huh? How's your day going? Hope tomorrow feels lighter." No advanced vocabulary. No perfect idioms. Just presence. In that parking lot, before starting the car, I sat quietly for a moment. Maybe healing doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Maybe sometimes it stands in front of you in a checkout line, smiles, and asks a small question. And maybe that small question is enough to remind you that you're still here, still capable of speaking, connecting, and continuing. How's your day going? For ordinary words. That's all it was. How's your day going? In another context, on another day, I would have answered automatically. Good. Smile. End of interaction. But after everything I had been carrying, language fatigue, marital tension, cultural isolation, those 4 words felt different. They didn't sound like a script. They sounded like an invitation. Small talk in the United States has a reputation for being shallow. Many newcomers misunderstand it. I did too. I thought real connection required depth, shared history, long emotional conversations. But American culture often builds connection in layers. The first layer is light. Predictable. Safe. Weather. Lines. Groceries. Schedules. It's not meaningless. It's foundational. Sociologists describe small talk as a social lubricant. It reduces uncertainty between strangers. It signals friendliness without intrusion. In a country where privacy is highly respected, this balance matters. You don't dive into someone's personal life immediately. You create a soft landing first. That day in the supermarket, I experienced something I had studied but never truly felt: microvalidation. When I answered, "It's been a long day," the woman didn't dismiss it. She didn't rush to positivity. She responded with empathy. Simple empathy. "I get that." Those 3 words did more than grammar drills ever had. Neuroscience explains why. When someone responds empathetically, mirror neurons activate. Your brain senses alignment. Stress hormones like cortisol decrease slightly. You feel safer. It's subtle, but measurable. Safety is the foundation of learning. For months, I had been trying to improve my English from a place of pressure. Pressure to sound professional. Pressure to avoid mistakes. Pressure to represent myself well as an immigrant, as a wife, as a working parent. Pressure narrows the brain's capacity for creativity and spontaneity. When the nervous system is tense, language becomes mechanical. But when you feel safe, words flow more naturally. That 5-minute exchange in the checkout line created safety. Not because it was profound. Because it was human. There's an interesting psychological finding. People consistently underestimate how positive brief conversations with strangers will feel. We expect awkwardness. We expect indifference. But studies show that most people are more open and responsive than we predict. I had predicted indifference. What I received was warmth. On the surface, the conversation was basic English. Short sentences. Everyday vocabulary. Nothing advanced. But that's the point. Real English is not built from complex grammar structures. It's built from rhythm and response. It's built from listening and reacting. It's built from tone. "How's your day going?" is not a linguistic challenge. It's an emotional opportunity. After leaving the supermarket, I replayed the conversation in my mind, not to criticize my pronunciation, but to notice something new. I had understood everything. I had responded naturally. I had even added my own sentence. For the first time in weeks, English didn't feel heavy. It felt alive. There's a principle in language acquisition called comprehensible input. You learn best when you understand most, but not all, of what you hear. That interaction was exactly that. Clear. Contextual. Supported by facial expressions and shared environment. It was the kind of practice textbooks try to simulate but rarely capture fully. And here's the deeper realization: small talk is not small. In a fast-paced society like the US, where people respect boundaries and guard time carefully, offering even 2 minutes of genuine attention is significant. It says, "You matter enough for this moment." Loneliness doesn't always come from being physically alone. It comes from feeling unseen. Invisible. Replaceable. That afternoon, for a few minutes, I wasn't invisible. And something unexpected happened inside me. Instead of thinking, "My English isn't good enough," I started thinking, "Maybe my English is enough for connection." That shift, from perfection to sufficiency, is powerful. Perfection is exhausting. Sufficiency is sustainable. When I got home, I spoke differently. Not dramatically. Just softer. More open. I told my husband about the interaction. He smiled. We talked, not about bills, but about how strange and comforting it is when a stranger shows kindness. Connection expanded from the supermarket line into my living room. All because of 4 words. Language is not only vocabulary. It's courage. It's presence. It's the willingness to answer honestly when someone asks a simple question. And sometimes, the sentence that sounds the most ordinary, "How's your day going?" becomes the doorway back to yourself. Real English, real life practice. Textbooks never prepared me for a checkout line. For years, I believed improving my English required more grammar drills, more vocabulary lists, more structured practice. I treated fluency like a mountain that could only be climbed with formal study. Sit down. Open notebook. Repeat after audio. Memorize phrases. But the most transformative English practice of my week happened between a grocery cart and a credit card machine. That realization changed everything. Language researchers often emphasize something called contextual learning. The brain retains information more effectively when it's tied to emotion and real-life context. When you feel something, stress, relief, connection, your memory encodes the language more deeply. That supermarket conversation stayed in my mind not because it was complex, but because it was emotional. Long line today, huh? How's your day going? Hope tomorrow feels lighter. Those sentences carried tone, facial expression, warmth. They were attached to a shift in my mood. My brain didn't store them as vocabulary. It stored them as experience. That's when I began to see everyday life in America differently. The barista asking, "What can I get started for you?" wasn't just customer service. It was listening practice. The neighbor saying, "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" wasn't small talk. It was speaking practice. The teacher at school explaining homework wasn't pressure. It was real-world comprehension training. English stopped being an academic subject. It became participation. There's a concept in second language acquisition called low-stakes output. This means practicing speaking in situations where the consequences of mistakes are minimal. A supermarket line is low stakes. A coffee order is low stakes. A short exchange with a neighbor is low stakes. Low stakes reduce fear. Reduced fear increases fluency. When I shifted my mindset from "I must sound perfect" to "I just need to respond," my anxiety dropped noticeably. And when anxiety drops, cognitive processing improves. The brain retrieves vocabulary faster. Sentences form more naturally. Perfection had been blocking progress. Real life unlocked it. I started intentionally using daily errands as micro-practice sessions. Not dramatic. Not forced. Just present. Instead of nodding silently, I would add one extra sentence. "Cashier, did you find everything okay?" Me, "Yes, thank you." It's busier than usual today. 2 sentences instead of 1. That was growth. I began listening more carefully to rhythm. Americans often connect words quickly. Intonation rises slightly in casual questions. The music of the language became more noticeable once I stopped obsessing over grammar. And something else shifted. I stopped seeing my accent as an enemy. In the US, accents are everywhere. Spanish accents, Indian accents, European accents, Asian accents. America is built from layers of migration. My voice wasn't an interruption. It was part of the soundscape. Studies show that listeners adapt to accents faster than speakers assume. The discomfort I feared often existed only in my imagination. When I allowed myself to speak imperfectly but consistently, conversations became smoother. Not because my English magically transformed overnight, but because my confidence did. Confidence doesn't come from eliminating mistakes. It comes from surviving them. That supermarket moment gave me proof that communication is about connection, not performance. So I created a simple personal rule: 1 small interaction a day. 1 question. 1 comment. 1 response longer than necessary. It sounds insignificant. But compound growth is powerful. Behavioral science calls this the 1% rule. Small improvements, repeated daily, create significant long-term change. Over weeks, I noticed measurable differences. I interrupted less awkwardly. I understood humor faster. I felt less tension before speaking. English no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a hallway with many open doors. And something even deeper happened. Practicing English in real life made me feel integrated into my environment. Instead of observing American culture from a distance, I was participating in it. Participation reduces loneliness. Loneliness thrives in observation mode, when you watch but don't engage. The moment you respond, you shift from outsider to contributor. That's what real English practice gave me. Not just better pronunciation. Belonging. The checkout line had been my unexpected classroom. The neighborhood became my conversation lab. My daily routine turned into immersive training. No expensive program. No dramatic breakthrough. Just life. And the more I leaned into those ordinary exchanges, the lighter English felt. Not because it became easier overnight, but because it finally became real. Climate, culture, and quiet growth. Seasons in America are dramatic. Winter doesn't politely arrive. It takes over. Snow piles up against doors. Wind cuts through jackets that looked warm in the store. You learn to check weather apps before planning anything. You learn new phrases like wind advisory and school delay. Climate here is not background decoration. It shapes schedules, moods, even conversations. And strangely, adapting to the weather taught me something about adapting to culture. In colder states, people don't linger outside chatting for long. Social gatherings are planned indoors. Invitations are often scheduled days in advance. Spontaneity exists, but within structure. At first, I interpreted this as emotional distance. It wasn't distance. It was design. American culture values independence deeply. People respect personal boundaries. They don't ask intrusive questions unless invited. Privacy is considered kindness. Back home, caring meant involvement. Here, caring often means space. Understanding that difference changed how I interpreted silence. When neighbors didn't ask detailed personal questions, they weren't uninterested. They were respectful. When coworkers didn't immediately become close friends, they weren't cold. They were professional. Culture shock often comes from misinterpretation. There's a psychological framework called cultural adaptation stages. First comes excitement. Then frustration. Then gradual adjustment. I had moved from excitement to frustration without realizing it. That supermarket moment helped push me toward adjustment. Even policies shaped my growth. In the U.S., systems are structured. Credit history matters. Appointments matter. Deadlines matter. You can't rely on informal flexibility. At first, this felt rigid. But over time, I saw the hidden benefit, clarity. When expectations are clear, responsibility becomes measurable. Managing healthcare plans, school forms, tax filings, these tasks forced me to engage with English at a deeper level. Not conversational English. Functional English. The language of forms, emails, official letters. It was intimidating at first. Legal vocabulary feels heavy. But every completed form built competence. Competence builds confidence. Psychologists explain that mastery experiences, small successful completions of challenging tasks, are one of the strongest sources of self-efficacy. Each time I handle a policy document on my own, I quietly prove to myself, I can function here. And functioning slowly turned into belonging. Climate shaped daily rhythms. Culture shaped social patterns. Policy shaped responsibility. But growth happened quietly. Autumn became my favorite season. Trees turned red and gold. People decorated their porches with pumpkins. I learned phrases like fall foliage and sweater weather. These weren't just vocabulary words. They were cultural signals. Shared references create shared identity. When I commented to a coworker, "The leaves are beautiful this year," and she responded enthusiastically, I felt something subtle, inclusion. Language is cultural currency. The more I understood cultural references, football season, Thanksgiving travel, back-to-school sales, the more conversations flowed naturally. You don't need to love every tradition. But recognizing them creates bridges. At home, my husband and I began integrating parts of American culture into our routines. We planned outings in advance. We budgeted more precisely. We respected quiet evenings as recharge time instead of interpreting them as emotional distance. Adaptation is not betrayal of your roots. It's expansion. Research in cross-cultural psychology shows that individuals who integrate elements of both their original culture and their new culture tend to experience better mental health outcomes than those who reject one side entirely. I stopped seeing adaptation as losing myself. I started seeing it as adding layers. The climate toughened me. The culture refined my interpretation of behavior. The policies disciplined my organization. The small talk softened my loneliness. Growth rarely announces itself loudly. It shows up when you realize you're no longer confused by the healthcare portal. When you respond naturally to a joke about the weather. When you schedule something without resentment. That supermarket interaction had cracked open a new perspective. Instead of viewing America as a place I was trying to survive, I began viewing it as a system I was learning to navigate. Navigation feels different from survival. Survival is reactive. Navigation is intentional. By the third year, I noticed something almost surprising. The wide American sky that once made me feel small now made me feel spacious. The structured schedules that once felt cold now felt reliable. The brief small talk that once seemed superficial now felt like tiny threads stitching me into the community. Loneliness didn't disappear completely. But it softened. And in that softening, space opened for gratitude, for curiosity, for love to breathe again. Quiet growth is powerful because you often don't recognize it until you look back. I arrived feeling invisible. Somewhere between snowstorms, scheduled coffee chats, tax forms, and checkout line conversations, I began to feel present. Not fully transformed, but rooted. Love spoken in simple words. Romance in a new country doesn't always look cinematic. It looks like shared calendars, packed lunches, and whispered conversations after the children fall asleep. After the supermarket moment, something subtle shifted inside me. I didn't suddenly become fluent. Our financial stress didn't vanish. But the heaviness that had wrapped around my voice began to loosen. And when your voice softens, your marriage feels it. That evening, instead of replaying our previous argument in my head, I told my husband about the woman in the checkout line. She just asked how my day was, I said. And somehow, it mattered. He smiled in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. Not because the story was dramatic, but because it was human. Stress had been speaking louder than love in our home. Bills spoke. Deadlines spoke. Responsibilities spoke. But we had forgotten to speak gently to each other. Language shapes emotional climate. Research in relationship psychology shows that couples who maintain a higher ratio of positive to negative interactions, sometimes called the 5-to-1 ratio, tend to have stronger, more stable relationships. Positive interactions don't need to be grand. They just need to be consistent. We started small. Instead of saying, "Did you pay the bill?" we added, "Thank you for handling that." Instead of silence after a long day, we added, "I know today was hard." These are simple English sentences. Basic vocabulary. No poetry. But simple does not mean shallow. In fact, when you're living in a second language, simplicity is powerful. It forces clarity. It strips away drama. It leaves intention exposed. I appreciate you. I'm tired, but I'm here. We'll figure this out. Short sentences. Strong impact. There's something almost protective about speaking love in simple English. It slows you down. You choose each word carefully. You avoid exaggeration. You say exactly what you mean. One night, after putting the kids to bed, we sat quietly at the kitchen table. The house was finally still. I looked at him and said, "I've been overwhelmed." Not accusing. Not defensive. Just honest. He didn't interrupt. He nodded. "Me too," he replied. That moment felt bigger than any perfect pronunciation I had ever practiced. Vulnerability reduces tension. Neuroscience shows that when someone responds calmly to emotional honesty, both nervous systems begin to regulate. Heart rates slow. Breathing steadies. Safety increases. Safety is not only necessary for language learning. It's necessary for love. Our adaptation to American life had been so focused on achievement, stable jobs, organized finances, responsible parenting, that we forgot to nurture emotional softness. The irony is that English, the language that once felt like a barrier between us, became the tool that helped us reconnect. Speaking feelings in a second language requires intention. You can't rely on automatic phrases from childhood. You have to build the sentence consciously. I miss how we used to laugh more. I don't want us to feel like roommates. I still believe in us. Each sentence felt deliberate. Brave in its own quiet way. Love in a foreign land demands resilience. You don't have extended family nearby to mediate arguments. You don't have familiar cultural cues to guide conflict resolution. You build your own system. And in that system, communication becomes everything. The supermarket interaction reminded me that connection begins with a question. So I started asking better questions at home. How are you really feeling? What's been weighing on you? What would make this week easier? These weren't therapy sessions. They were 5-minute check-ins. But consistency turned them into anchors. Gradually, the atmosphere shifted. Laughter returned in small doses. Inside jokes resurfaced. Even our arguments became less sharp because we were no longer speaking from isolation. Marriage doesn't need grand speeches to survive cultural transition. It needs repeated micro-moments of care. And sometimes, the courage to speak those moments begins outside the marriage. In a checkout line. Under fluorescent lights. With a stranger who unknowingly models kindness. Love doesn't require complex vocabulary. It requires presence. And in learning to speak simply, I rediscovered something essential. Intimacy is built sentence by sentence. The quiet decision. There comes a moment when quitting feels reasonable, almost logical. You look at the time you've invested, the slow progress, the mistakes that still repeat themselves, and a quiet voice whispers, maybe this isn't for you. That voice sounds calm, sensible, safe. And that's exactly why it's dangerous. In this final part of our journey, we don't chase motivation. We examine commitment. Not the loud, dramatic kind that announces itself on social media. Not the kind that depends on mood. Real commitment is quiet. It shows up on ordinary days. It studies when no one is watching. It practices when improvement feels invisible. Think about the version of you who almost gave up. That version was tired, frustrated, maybe embarrassed, maybe comparing themselves to someone who seemed to learn faster. But here's what matters. That version of you kept going long enough to reach this point in the video. That is not weakness. That is evidence. Throughout this series, you listened carefully. You read slowly. You repeated sentences even when pronunciation felt uncomfortable. You stayed present when your mind wanted distraction. That is discipline forming beneath the surface. Progress in language learning is rarely dramatic. It doesn't explode overnight. It builds quietly, word by word, sentence by sentence, mistake by mistake. You might still feel behind. You might still think your accent isn't perfect. You might still translate in your head sometimes. And that's okay. Fluency is not a single breakthrough moment. It is a collection of small decisions not to quit. Right now, you are making one more decision. To continue. To improve. To believe that slow growth is still growth. Take a deep breath. Notice how much more you understand compared to when you started. Notice how much more confident you feel reading this paragraph without rushing. That confidence did not appear magically. You built it. The difference between someone who succeeds and someone who quits is rarely talent. It is endurance. The willingness to feel uncomfortable longer than others. So here is your quiet challenge. Tomorrow, show up again. Even if it's just 10 minutes. Even if you feel tired. Even if progress feels small. Because one day, you will look back and realize this was the moment you didn't stop. And that made all the difference. Becoming the person who doesn't quit. There is a powerful shift that happens when you stop asking, "Can I do this?" and start asking, "Who am I becoming by doing this?" The question changes everything. This is no longer just about learning English. It is about identity. At the beginning of this journey, you focused on results. Better pronunciation. Faster listening. Fewer mistakes. That was natural. Everyone wants visible progress. But somewhere along the way, something deeper started forming. Resilience. Patience. Consistency. You practiced on days when you felt motivated. You practiced on days when you didn't. You showed up even when improvement felt slow. That pattern matters more than perfect grammar. Language learning is not only a skill. It is training for your character. Every time you repeat a sentence instead of skipping it, you strengthen focus. Every time you try again after mispronouncing a word, you build courage. Every time you finish a session instead of closing the video early, you reinforce discipline. These qualities transfer into every part of your life. The student who keeps practicing becomes the professional who keeps improving. The learner who tolerates mistakes becomes the leader who tolerates growth. The person who refuses to quit in private becomes unstoppable in public. Right now, you may still see flaws in your speaking. You may still hesitate before answering. You may still search for vocabulary. But compare yourself to who you were before starting this series. Your listening is sharper. Your reading is smoother. Your confidence is stronger. Not perfect. Stronger. Perfection is fragile. Growth is durable. In this final reflection, understand this truth. Success is rarely about intensity. It is about identity. When you see yourself as someone who continues, who improves, who learns regardless of mood, quitting stops being an option. So from this moment forward, don't say, I am trying to learn English. Say, I am someone who learns every day. That small change in language changes your future. Close your eyes for a second. Picture yourself 6 months from now, speaking more clearly, understanding more naturally, thinking in English without translating. That version of you is not built in one dramatic leap. It is built through quiet repetition, just like today. You are not behind. You are in progress. And progress, when protected, becomes transformation. Keep going. Not because it is easy, but because you are becoming someone who finishes what they start. The day you realize you didn't give up. One day, without warning, you will notice something strange. You are listening to English, and you understand it. Not every word. Not perfectly. But naturally. And in that quiet moment, you will realize something far more important than vocabulary or grammar. You didn't quit. This final part is not about techniques. It is about recognition. Think back to the beginning of your journey. The confusion. The slow reading. The constant pausing. The self-doubt. You may have felt embarrassed by your pronunciation. You may have compared yourself to fluent speakers and wondered if you were too late, too slow, or simply not talented enough. But you stayed. You pressed play again. You repeated sentences again. You tried again. Improvement rarely feels dramatic while it's happening. It feels repetitive. It feels ordinary. Sometimes it even feels boring. Yet beneath that repetition, your brain has been building connections, strengthening patterns, forming confidence. That is how mastery grows, quietly. Right now, you may still notice mistakes when you speak. You may still hesitate before certain words. That does not mean you are failing. It means you are practicing at the edge of your ability. And that edge is exactly where growth lives. Language is not conquered in a single breakthrough. It is earned in small, consistent sessions like this one. So pause for a moment. Read this sentence slowly. Notice how much easier it feels compared to months ago. Notice how your mind processes English faster now. Notice how fear has become smaller. Those changes did not happen by accident. They happened because you kept showing up. There will still be days when motivation disappears. There will still be moments of frustration. But now you know something powerful, feelings change. Commitment remains. You are no longer someone who wants to learn English. You are someone who is learning English. That identity is stronger than any temporary doubt. When this video ends, the real journey continues. Not in dramatic leaps. Not in overnight transformations. But in quiet daily decisions. One more lesson. One more practice. One more attempt. And one day soon, you will speak with confidence and barely remember the version of yourself who almost gave up. Keep going. Because the person you are becoming is worth the effort. Before you click away, pause for a second. Somewhere in the world right now, someone with the same doubts you once had is deciding whether to quit or continue. The only difference between you and them is this: you stayed until the end. This channel is not just about learning English. It's about building confidence, strengthening your listening skills, improving your speaking fluency, and proving to yourself that slow progress is still powerful progress. If today's story made you feel seen, if these lessons helped you practice real English conversation, if you felt even a small shift in your mindset, then this is only the beginning. On this channel, you'll find carefully designed slow English stories, immersive English listening practice, and structured exercises to help you think in English naturally, without fear, without pressure. And here's the exciting part. The next story goes deeper. More emotion. More real-life situations. More practical vocabulary you can actually use. So don't miss it. Subscribe now to continue improving your English every day. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new English listening and speaking practice session. Leave a comment and tell me, what part of your English journey feels hardest right now? Your breakthrough might start in the next video. And remember, fluency is not a talent. It's a decision you make daily. I'll see you in the next story.